All right, hopefully this is going to work tonight. Tonight's class, we have two chapters, Regulation and Land Development. We talked a little bit about some of this stuff last night in the principles class. This is where these two classes kind of mirror each other. The last chapter tonight, Unit 26, is on environmental law. And everything in the last chapter, none of it will be on your test. Because it's all more about commercial issues with environmental law. We'll talk about a few of the things that are on that relate to residential, but for the most part, it's commercial. So we'll fly through that. All of this stuff should go really quick tonight, and hopefully this machine will work tonight and let me capture everything. So I won't have to go back and do it again. So when I talk about land development, what comes to mind? What comes to mind when we talk about land development? New houses. Shopping centers. Infrastructure. Parks. Schools. Construction workers. Jobs. Redevelopment. There's all kinds of things that are going on with regulate, and then the regulation of it is how it's controlled. If you ever drive into, there's parts of Florida I'll drive in and I'll see a warehouse next to an apartment building, or a house right next to a warehouse, and you can see, wait a minute, zoning wasn't done quite right. The ideal zoning is if you drive down I-75, you'll see houses right next to I-75, and you'll see where they literally cut neighborhoods apart, split neighborhoods when they put I-75 in. And you can see remnants of that as you go all along I-75. But the idea is there should be some kind of you go from industrial to a shopping center or an office building to an apartment building to residential. It should step down. It doesn't work that way, but that's the perfectly planned community we like to see. And what you see is a lot of the areas around Cincinnati, we haven't had regulated land developments, didn't start until the 50s. And then each city has its own codes, things that they do. And a very interesting aspect of all of this is if you get an opportunity to come on a planning commission or a zoning board of appeals, go to a few council meetings, show up and talk, and they'll probably push you onto these things when you have some real estate knowledge. But you get to understand and appreciate the history of this and how this works, and why it's important that we have some regulation of what's going on. So, zoning. It's the regulation by government, usually a municipality, of structures and uses of land with designated zones. The power to zone is given to each locality by the state through something called enabling legislation. So the state says we give each one of these villages, cities, communities, townships, enabling legislation to let them create building code, zoning, things that they need to do that or look after their best interests. But this is also part of our police power, where we have the power to say, hey, you bought the land, but you got to live with the zone. You got to live with what's going on. So the power to zone, again, is given there by this enabling legislation. And there's three basic zoning classifications. You typically have residential, commercial, and industrial. And start out as three. Now we have over 15 in some localities. So they've gone really far. And then we also have architectural review boards. We have overlay districts. We have all kinds of things that are going on, because the idea here is, depending upon what community you're in, they want to try to control how the land is developed, where it's headed, but also plan for growth and make it done right. So non-conforming use is a legal use that was established prior to the present zoning classification and is permitted to continue despite its non-conformance with the current zoning code. So non-conformance is said to run with the land, and some localities have taken steps to ensure the discontinuance of non-conforming uses. So in the neighborhood I live in, we actually have several non-conforming uses. There's residential right around it, and even the lot itself is zoned residential, but we have a small garage. When I moved into the neighborhood over 30 years ago, it was an HVAC shop. Then it closed down for a little while, and now it's a plumbing shop. But it's grandfathered, so it sits in a residential zone. If it sits vacant for 3 years, it converts back to residential. They'll no longer be able to use it for the commercial, even though it sits right in the middle of the residential neighborhood. So those are called grandfathering. They're non-conforming uses. Other types of non-conforming uses would be when you put a church or a school in the middle of a residential neighborhood. But it's the appropriate place for them. You like them zoned and sheltered that way. But those would be non-conforming uses that we're saying, hey, wait a minute. Even though this area is zoned residential, we want to put this in this zone. So non-conforming uses are allowed, but you have to take those before the planning board, before the village council, before the city, whatever, to get it all approved. So you go through a process.
So how difficult is it when something is zoned, say it's zoned residential, or they put some sort of restriction on the zoning for that to change?
Years ago, it's not real difficult, but it can be very political, and that can make it difficult. But years ago, where I live on the main drag is Wooster Pike, Route 50. And Route 50, the commercial zoning is only like 1 or 2 lots deep. So Jeffrey Anderson came to us years ago and said, I want to take this corner lot, and I want to build a Rite Aid here. But in order to build the Rite Aid, I have to go 4 lots deep instead of 2 lots deep. So I want to be able to ensure those other 2 houses can become a retail zone rather than a residential zone. When he came to us, sat down with us as the planning commission, we approved it. It made sense because it was the right way to redevelop that corner. So what we did is there's still houses there, but those houses are still being used as residential, but they're actually zoned for retail or commercial. So it escalated the value of those, but only when the commercial development happens. Until a retail redevelopment happens, there's still houses. They're probably not going to rebuild houses on those lots, but those remain houses. So the people benefit, but we've already set something in place for future planned development to change that area. And it took a meeting. But if he would have come to us, it would have been contentious. We could have said, hell no, you're never going to get that. So again, it's part of how the developer is approaching the community to do that. It can happen very quickly. It makes sense. Other times they hold off and say, absolutely not. It just depends on where you're at, what you're trying to do. What's your other question?
So those houses that are now zoned retail, let's say when it's demolished, if someone buys that property at a high price for retail, but then can they build another house on it?
They probably would not. It wouldn't be wise to build a house on this zone retail. You'd be better off to hold the property and wait for the retail development to happen. Because the corner properties are old retail buildings, they eventually will be torn down. Something new will happen. And you need the depth to be able to make a drive-through, to be able to make the things you want. Originally, when he came to us, he wanted to put a Rite Aid on that corner. What's a Rite Aid have? You know, it's a box, but around that box you have parking, but Rite Aid is a drive-through pharmacy. So it's typical with the drive-through today's, what shops are looking for, what they're trying to do. Would we let a fast food go there? Well, it's zoned retail, so yeah, probably a fast food could go there. The neighborhood might object to it, but it could be done. But no, it wouldn't make sense to build a new house there. Because,
Is it legally permissible?
sure, yeah. Because, well, it's legally permissible because of the use of the lot right there and what's on 2 sides of it. Okay, so you have the commercial development on Wooster Pike. It comes 2 lots deep. Then there's 2 more lots that are houses. Let's say the 3rd stays a house, the 4th gets the house. Something happens, it gets destroyed, and there's a fire. That 4th house is zoned retail now. Would you build a house right back on it? It depends upon the value and use of the person that owns it, but he could build a house on it because there's another house between them and the next retail. That would be conforming to what's around it. We're not going to stop that, but what we were allowing for is the ability for somebody to come in, buy it all, and tear it down and rebuild. But again, it's political, what makes sense. We were looking at it from a practical nature. By going ahead and allowing the zoning there, we're allowing for that redevelopment to happen, because we want to see those old storefronts get redeveloped. They don't look good. We want to see them get redeveloped. We'd like to see new there. What was your question?
I was just going to say, I was just looking at the book here, and it says if the non-conforming building is substantially destroyed, it cannot be rebuilt in non-compliance.
Well, again, it depends upon how they came back to the city and or the village and what they said they wanted to do. If we saw there was no retail development happening for that 3rd lot and the 4th lot was destroyed, we'd probably let somebody build a house. But again, it doesn't make, financially, it doesn't make a lot of sense when you have more potential. The developer or somebody who's an investor is going to say, wait a minute, I want to hold this for the ultimate retail value. The land's worth a whole lot more retail than it is residential. So again, localities, it depends upon who are the people that are in control. Is it the planning commission? Is it council? And by the way, when you're on a planning commission, you don't officially pass the laws. you make recommendations to council to vote on things. They're looking to you to say, are you doing, it doesn't make sense. Is it right? So in the zoning board of appeals, they're the people that you come to when you've got issues. They allow variances to happen, but they can also be politically motivated and say no. So there's a lot of different things that can happen here around the politics of the community you're in. Zone change, a zoning amendment made by the legislative body that enacted the zoning code. So again, the planning commission heard the case. We made a recommendation to council to say, let's change the zoning. So then it was up to council to actually change the zone. Variance is permission obtained from the appropriate government authorities to deviate a minor way from specific requirement of the zone under zoning code. So you can get use variances. You can have this zoning board of appeals, a board of adjustment, but nobody has a right to a variance. The variance is you asked for it. You don't assume you have the right to a variance. So when we were trying to build a garage years ago, we thought we had more than enough land in the back to build a 3-car garage. We went before the ZBA to put up our 3-car garage, and we were turned down. So we sued the village because that's not the way you can go on to court then at that point in time. And we took them to court, and we lost again 3 years and $13,000 later. It costs money to pursue these things, but we thought we were right. So we didn't. We have a garage, a pad for 3, but we only have 2-car garage. We still put our building up. We just cut it down. Exceptions in zoning. Permitted uses provided for the ordinances that are inconsistent with the designated zone. So you can get these exceptions again by sitting before the people that create the code, the planning board, zoning board, whatever it is that you're going to sit before, to ask for an exception. They can be done. Special use permits is a system by whereby special exceptions to zoning ordinance are granted by the land use administrator under a permit arrangement set forth in the zoning ordinance. Again, so they were allowed to sneak it in or use it in such a manner that they could do that. Variations of special uses in traditional land. We have something called cluster development where we can take, hey, you have 200 acres. You're allowed to build 200 units, 1-acre lots. You can build 200 units on it by 1-acre lot divisions. But what we want to do with cluster development, we can say, hey, wait a minute, we are allowed to build 200 acres, but we want to put the 200 units, we want to put all 200 units in the first 100 acres. So we're going to cluster them closer together. We're not going to add any more density to the overall land. We're just going to change how the buildings look and how they relate to each other. So we're not making any more use for the fire department, police department, schools based on how we're occupying the land, but we're going to cluster it all together. So instead of being 1-acre lots, they're half-acre lots, and then we allow the area, the other 100 acres around it, to remain green, to be park, to be something public area. So that's what we call cluster development, when we're bringing it in closer together.
Would Weatherington be a cluster?
Weatherington?
Yeah.
When they originally did Weatherington, because it's around a golf course, it really is a planned unit development. Because at the front of Weatherington is retail properties, and then the everything builds around a golf course. And they're still decent sized lots, but they're small because, again, at the time when people were buying those houses, they didn't want big yards to take care of. They wanted to be on the golf course. They wanted the ability to be close to the golf course, belong to Weatherington Club, but not have to come home and spend a weekend, literally the whole weekend, mowing their yard.
So many of them are on those like shared driveways, little streets.
You have panhandle lots, your little shared things, yes, and that's, again, that's what happened when they submitted for their subdivision plan, what they went in. But it's more than likely it was a PUD because of how they set that up and what they did. And so by doing a PUD, they changed all the rules. But the PUD, we'll go into it, had architectural requirements, has a lot of different requirements. If you notice, all the houses in Weatherington have some similar look to them, some similar type of brick finish, some similar look that says, hey, they're part of this community. Yeah. So large lot zoning. This is a zoning classification that requires a minimum of 1 acre or more land for each single family house that is constructed. There's advantages, disadvantages of doing that. And then there's also some judicial responses to large lot zoning. You'll see about that in your textbook. I had a piece of property in Claremont County. It was 130 acres, but to drive to the 130 acres, you had to go through 2 blocks, of single family on slab houses. So we said the window getting to this back property wasn't very pretty because they were kind of the lower class houses on slab, not real nice, just little teeny ranch boxes that you had to drive through. And the developer wanted to buy the 200 acres and build some very nice homes in the back. He couldn't get the cluster development he wanted to do. The 200 acres, the back half of it fell off an enormous hillside. So in order to develop it, he would have had to put sewer lift stations in. He would have had to do a lot of infrastructure to make that property work. Economically, it wasn't feasible. So he went back and he said, I want to do this cluster development. I want to bring all my houses up to the front, let the back stay green. The Claremont County said no. So they went the opposite way. When they finally sold the land, 130 acres, now it's 5-acre minimum lots. So now they're called estate houses. So they took the land value, instead of a $30,000 for a lot, it's now a couple $100,000 for the 5-acre lot. So the land developer, subdivision developer, went in. He still made his money because of how he did these large acre lots. The builder, they're making money because they're building bigger houses, but not as much as if they would have done that number of units. But everybody still made money. It's just it wasn't what we kind of planned when we originally put it up on the market to sell it. So again, creative uses. How do you look at this? How do you skin that cat? What do you do? Plan unit development. It's an overlay zoning concept that enables a developer to obtain higher density, more mixed use than underlying zoning would allow, with more generous provision for green space. So Weatherington, what's its green space? The golf course. It's half the development is the golf course. So that's how they went to go in originally, to say, hey, we're going to buy the farms that were there. I don't remember how many farms were there as part of that originally. We're buying these farms. We're going to change the use from ag to residential, but we're also going to put strip center in the front and some other things to make it a mixed use development. And that's what they did. And got the zoning to do it. Performance standard zoning. This enables certain standards that must be met by any user of land within the zone. Standards have been set up for noise, vibrations, odors, toxic waste, signs, heat emanating from a site. Performance standard zonings, you're not going to see this in residential, but where you'll see it is in industrial, commercial areas where they set aside this stuff. Right now, the city or state of Ohio and other states have this thing for industrial land where they want to make it build ready. They're pad sites that are build ready, so they've already put in some of the infrastructure, some of the roads, sewage, utility easements. They're just waiting for the factories to come, or the commercial warehouse, whatever it is, to come to the site so they can build it. So they've already gone out to developers to try to get them to be pad ready sites. There's money in economic development to try to get the state to have certain of those things set aside so the state can go back out to users and say, we've got pad ready sites. Just do your deal here. We'll give you tax incentives, we'll do whatever, but I got pad ready sites already. So we have these kind of redevelopments going on, but it's also performance standard zoning that they're putting in place while they're doing it. Agricultural land zoning. Lands are actively being used for grazing and crop production. So what we're seeing now is a lot of conservation easements. Our farms are going away. Okay, where I work in Westchester, when I managed it years ago, it was a farm. Now it's a shopping center. You know, I watched that whole area. I was part of making it go from the farm to the retail. But there are people around that are saying, no, we still need farms. We still got to be able to grow crops. So now we're saying, no, we're going to go the other way. And we're going to say these farms can no longer be cut up. They can't be turned into the next housing subdivision or retail or multifamily. We're going to keep them farms. So they're doing conservation easements while they're doing it.
Have you heard there's some kind of government program for that? They'll pay you to put your stuff in a farm easement.
There are some, yeah, but I don't know that they're in southern Ohio, but yes, they are around.
Yeah, I got a call from some guy there because there was something with the easement they had to describe the width of the blanket. It wasn't a width, and they needed to have it re-described for a certain width, or they couldn't get this farm easement.
Because of where it was going.
Yeah, and I was talking to the attorney about it. I think it was out in Brown County. It was like 200 acres. They're going to pay them. Like 200,000.
To keep it farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean,
that's all they're going to do anyway. It's out in the middle of nowhere.
that's the same as paying a farmer not to farm, literally.
I know.
Yeah, but there are programs, there are lots of creative programs to do that because they want to keep the ability to grow. Because once you develop the land, you can't grow anymore. It's gone. So there's some reasons for doing it. Subdivisions regulations. There's restrictions on division of a parcel of land into 2 or more units. Subdivisions require prior approval by administrators such as a planning board. So yeah, you're going to go sit in front of a planning board. You're going to show them what you're going to do with your planned subdivision, how you're going to parcel it out, how you're going to create your roads, what you're going to do. But they also have now impact fees, where they're saying to the subdivider builders, if you want to put a subdivision here, you've got to do certain things. Let's say, and you'll see this right now as you drive through Westchester and other areas, Liberty Township, you'll see where the new subdivision is, where they came in a half a mile before they turned into the new subdivision, and they made the 2-lane road a 4-lane road, or 3-lane road, because they put the turn lane in, or they put the wider lane in so people could go out, go in. Who paid for that? The subdivision paid for that road improvement as part of their impact fee. But then the impact fees also, they're saying to the subdividers, builders, etc., there's other impact fees they ask them for. They might ask them for money for police, fire, schools. But the ultimate problem with impact fees is it's not the builder, it's not the subdivider that pays the impact fee. Who is it? The homeowner. The person that buys in the very end is the one that pays the impact fees. So as much as they're putting impact fees to say we need improvements and done, and they want to put it in at that stage, yeah, the subdividers are paying for it, but they're going to pass the cost on to the actual end user. So the impact fee device requiring subdivider fund major offsite infrastructure expansion serves community at large as well as subdivision residents. This is all legal stuff, but it's newly created because it's ways for communities to come and get more money if they allow things to happen. Very, very, like I said, building a new subdivision is very political. You know, you're giving money to a lot of people to do a lot more than just put the roads in. Incentive zoning is a system of zoning incentives that are granted to developers when they provide certain benefits to the community. Again, this whole thing about getting pad ready and things like that, there's some incentive zoning, and they are paying. There's economic development money that they're using to pay for these things to get them done. So now the thing is ethics, the ecological imperatives and value choices that we have when we have development. We have things called wetlands. Everybody used to have wetlands were a bad thing. You don't want wetlands to be on your property. But people have said, hey, wetlands aren't so bad because they have groundwater levels underneath the surface of much of the year. They're covered by aquatic vegetation. You know what? We need this aquatic vegetation. It needs to exist. We need the wetlands to absorb storm overflow. We don't want to just come through and get rid of our wetlands. They're necessary. They also have certain climate environment to have wildlife. So again, you want to keep some of that together. Floodplains are areas near waterways that are prone to flooding. They're getting protected. Not totally, because guess what? We're coming up with better ways to build on floodplains. We're not going to put the house flat. We're going to put the house on stilts. You know, we've got other ways of dealing with the floodplains. So we're getting better at using the land and using technology to help us build. But sometimes the floodplains are better off being left alone. Coastal zones, areas including coastal waters and adjacent shorelands. What's going on with coastals today? They're eroding. The water level of the seas is rising, and our coasts are going, literally falling into the ocean. We're losing our coastlines. So we have coastal zones that are protected.
Global warming.
Well, exactly. Well, I'm curious to see, because global warming, it's not just the coast, it also impacts rivers and streams. And we'll see more flooding as a result of that whole process. Whether you believe it or not, guys, it's happening. Critical areas. Areas legislatively identified containing natural limitations are ones that are important to maintaining ecosystems. So what happened this past week with some of these critical areas, ecosystems? What happened in government this week out in Utah? He took them away, took protected lands away. So what are they going to do with those protected lands? They want to mine them, and they want to do certain things on them to pull minerals and things out of the land. And people are saying, wait, stop. Land is a limited resource, and when you pull everything out of it and you use it up, it's gone. It's gone. And man-made things don't replace all of that stuff. we can't recreate it all. So these are part of the issues about, when we let zoning happen and we do certain things, what are we going to be ruling for? Are we ruling? It's in the good of the neighborhood or in good of the community. Well, what's good? Is it good to say, no, we don't want more development, or is it good to allow development to happen, but allow it to be planned development? It's a lot of questions. What's the right way to do it? Historic preservation, historical properties. I still like historical properties. The preservation of buildings and perhaps archaeological sites from destruction by new development. So what's going on now is we have transferable development rights, a system of land controls that permit the transfer of the right to develop from preservation sites that are desired but impermissible to other sites that are restricted, but made permissible by offering zoning variances. So think about this. In a city like Chicago or a city like New York, you have a historic site. There is plenty of room to build air rights. People are doing the air rights. So these people that own these historic properties are saying, wait a minute, I have more capacity to build, but I'm not going to because my property is historically protected. It's not going to happen. But now I can sell my air rights. I'm not letting somebody build over, but I'm selling the rights that I have to be able to develop to others. So these things it's creating another market for the land. It's not the actual raw land, but it's the ability to use land. So they're creating another market to do this. The aesthetics originally regulated to retain the visual scenic beauty. We still have a lot of aesthetic type zoning where they do want to get in. They want to look at what architectural review. But it doesn't happen everywhere, but we have people that will look at in certain places. Then the overlay zoning is protect a natural resource. Regulation superimposes additional restrictions on existing zoning districts. Again, overlay says we're going to allow this, but it's got to meet this requirement. And where I live in Fairfax, they did some overlay zoning. They allowed the PUD to happen where the Walmart is, but they also did overlay zoning along that whole roadway on Red Bank Road to allow certain things to happen, to allow roads to be wide, because they were thinking at the time when they did it years ago, the 32 connector was going to go through there. Now we don't think the 32 connector is going to ever happen, but they're still saying they were trying to overlay zoning to allow certain things to happen there. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes another 20 years from now. That's not part. What I'm talking about is down in Fairfax. What you're talking about is at Madison and Red Bank in the city, and that's no. Well, the MedPace connector now goes in front of the school building. Okay, that comes over. But MedPace, the campus MedPace itself, the hotel went in where the garage was, and where the United Dairy Farmers is, they're trying to buy the United Dairy Farmer. United Dairy Farmers is holding out. They want to put, yes, retail and office buildings down in that little ditch down in there.
You know they're doing that at the corner of Stewart and Montgomery Road.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's going to be a multifamily site there too. Yeah. I saw an apartment development that was going to go there on that corner. No, it's going to be multifamily. It's going to be multifamily right there. But high-end multifamily. They're going to charge a lot of money. And it's exception for that neighborhood. It's a really cute little pocket of town right there. I love the houses on Ken Arbor and the other places back in there. I love to detour through there. Sometimes I cut through Stewart when I go up to Kenwood, go the back way. And there's a lot of cool, old, neat houses there. Yeah, they tore down a whole chunk of stuff there. Yeah, so is that overlay zoning? I don't know, but they took and they're redeveloping the area. So it was originally all residential, and now it's going to be more of a commercial or multifamily zoning. So zoning does change. It can change. Okay, so that, the issue is as we look at making zoning changes, what's the right way to go? Where are we going with this stuff? And what you need to understand as a realtor when you're selling houses, if your house that you're selling or you're helping somebody buy is in the middle of a residential neighborhood, chances are it's always going to be a residential house. But if their house or the piece of property they're looking at is on a main road or it's next to something that's not residential, Your job as a realtor is to help them discover what is it they have. They may assume it's zoned residential, but it may not be. It may have a better, higher, and best use. How many of you taken appraisal classes? How many of you talked about highest and best use so far? So what is highest and best use? Best use for the land, but it also means using more money for the owner. What we're looking at, how do you make it worth more? And the way to make it worth more is if it looks residential, but it might be commercial. It might have a different use. So from a real estate standpoint, understand what the zoning is of the property you're at. You can go to any village or city office, you'll see a zoning map. You can ask questions of anybody that works there to get zoning maps. You can go online through the CAGIS map system of Hamilton County, and you can see zoning information. It's a little cumbersome to get through, but it's available there. You just have to be patient with it. But there's plenty of people that can tell you what the zoning is, but your job as a realtor is to understand what that zoning is. You're going to make some representations when you take the listing or when you're helping your buyers. What is that property? So understand what it is. Any questions about zoning? All right. Yeah.
Quick one about what you were saying about how some lands are protected, I guess, for environmental reasons. Are you saying that like there are certain developers that pay off the government or whatever to develop in those areas?
Well, wetlands, or floodplain areas. You want them to stay green, or you want them to stay what they are. But developers typically would like to come in and build. So it's a matter of what's the zoning going to allow? What are you going to allow people to do? That's what lobbyists are for. But the other thing is, just because it says it's zoned that way doesn't mean it has to stay that way. It's very political when they come in and they sit down and say, hey, we got an idea, we want to change this piece of land. Okay, so this property I'm on today, where my shopping center is today, it's a farm, but there's a stream right alongside it. And originally when they put Union Center Boulevard in, they stopped development of Union Center Boulevard for a little while, and they said, oh, shoot, we found Indian remnants. Okay, not burial grounds, but encampment sites along this little river. Well, it's part of the Miami River. It's a little stream right now, but it's part of the Miami River. It's part of a canal system from many years in the early 1900s where they brought the crops down to the city to make beer. But for a while there, they found remnants. So they had to stop construction and go figure out what they were. But the idea is right on the one side of that stream right now is an apartment community. And down below that is a condo community. And then on our side is a shopping center. But then there's still some green land around it. We own part of that. We'll never develop it because it costs too much money. It doesn't make sense to do it. And we also have a big detention pond on it that the property needs to meet its zoning requirements. We got to have a place for water to run off. So we've got all this stuff going on there, but years ago somebody could come in and say, well, wait a minute, we want to make this smaller. We want to change this. We want to get rid of some of this green area, some of this water area. And down the road from us, they actually took part of the detention area, and it's part of the irrigation system now. They put pumps in the irrigation in the pond, in the detention pond, to do water irrigation for the green areas around the area, which is the smart way to do it. But it wasn't cheap. But now it's cheap as owners. We don't have to pay a lot of money for the irrigation to be there. But it was an expensive system to put in. So it's cool, it works, but again, there's always people trying to push the limit to build as much as they can.